do you think there are like, I mean, again, this is another thing that would be really hard to determine, but do you think there are instances where, they start someone out on this path, or like maybe not fully elucidating it, but they give someone a leg up, like they did Epstein with his math job and then his Bear Stearns job, or King with his credit union, and then it doesn't work out for whatever reason, and then they just discard them before the world ever knows their name.
My surmise on that is they get busted molesting a kid. And
Hmm.
then at that point, someone in intelligence can see that they have talents, and then take those talents and the pedophilia and then point it in a direction that can be used by intelligence. That's my. I've been at this. I've been in this. This underworld for 20 years, and that's what I believe goes on. Is that some people will get busted, and the thing about it is the CIA has had, and we know about this Operation Midnight Climax, has had safe houses in both New York and also in San Francisco with hidden cameras where people would be blackmailed. They would go there. It was ostensibly a brothel, and people would go there, and the CIA people would drug them and do other things to them. And then most of these guys had no recourse because they were married and they didn't want to blow their lives up. So the CIA with hidden cameras and blackmailing people, it's been around for a very, very long time. Political, like I said early on, sexual political blackmail in the United States goes back as far as the United States. And what's kind of interesting about this, I mean, J. Edgar Hoover was a blackmailer par excellence, and he was probably being blackmailed too. But he accumulated all that power because you can destroy someone's life. A politician has zero incentive to come forward and say, I molested a kid and I'm being blackmailed. Zero incentive, because that would completely decimate his life, decimate his family. He would live ignominiously for the rest of his life. So these politicians and power brokers are pretty safe marks to blackmail. And the one thing that people miss about all this is that, like, Craig Spence was much more of a blackmail artist than King. I mean, King set it all up, and King did his share of blackmail, but a lot of it was done at Craig Spence's home in Washington, D.C. Now, Epstein had hidden cameras in his house in Florida. He had hidden cameras in his house in New York. He had hidden cameras on his island. And if you look at the people in the Black Book, I managed to get a copy of the Black Book and I put it up on the internet in 2015. If you look at the powerful men in the book, and then the same thing with Spence, like Leslie Wexner, Jeffrey Epstein was pandering kids to Leslie Wexner. Now, I wrote an article. If you want to really deep dive into this, you can read my article. It's published by the Sheer Post. You can type in Sheer Post Nick Brian Epstein. I show that Les Wexner has big time ties to organized crime. The person that does most of the trucking for him is an appendage of the Genovese crime family. One of the attorneys that worked for Wexner was shot execution style, 2 bullets in the back of the head with the 22, like how the mob and the CIA like to do it. So Wexner has this history of mafia, of being part of the mafia, or being tangentially part of the mafia. And if Epstein didn't have a large intelligence organization behind him, Les Wexner is just going to call up his friends in the Genovese crime family and say, off this dude. But because Jeffrey Epstein, and that for that matter, Craig Spence, had very powerful entities behind them, these intelligence entities, that went to these perpetrators and said, you are compromised, and that's just the way it is. And don't try to hurt Jeffrey Epstein or don't try to hurt Craig Spence, because this will come back to haunt you. And these people have to be obsequious, because what else? What else are they going to do? So, and that's a point that people miss on this, is that if you're going to blackmail very powerful people, Jeffrey Epstein, as a college dropout from a blue collar family, he's not going to be able to blackmail very powerful people by himself, but he has to have an organization behind him. Same with Craig Spence.
Could you talk about another one of the major figures in this book here is a man named Gary Caradori. He was a private detective. Could you talk about how he got involved in the case, what he investigated, what he found out, and what happened to him?
Gary Caradori was an amazing investigator. He had retired from the Nebraska State Patrol, who is dirty in all this, by the way. They helped cover up this pedophile network. Well, just about every legal entity in Nebraska helped cover up uh, this pedophile network. But Gary Caradori, he was a hard charging private eye. He ran a corporation that was called Caracorp. It had over 200 employees, and he was one of the best private detectives in the United States at that time. He would dress up as a priest. He would, he had all kinds of costumes, and he had a passion for finding kids that had been enmeshed in the sex trade. So when this subcommittee formed, after the subcommittee formed initially to look at King's looting of $40 million, but then the social service personnel came to the Senate subcommittee and said, there's a pedophile network going on. So the Nebraska subcommittee ultimately hired Gary Caradori. And Gary Caradori he was a whirlwind, and he was finding new victims and videotaping them. I've got like 200 flight receipts of Lawrence E. King's. Most of them go to Washington, D.C. And that was because of Gary Caradori. He was very good at working the streets. And he realized that the FBI was trying to set him up for scripting the child abuse allegations. I mean, that's how desperate they were. And with the Franklin scandal, and I also believe with the Epstein scandal, if the dominoes had started falling in Omaha, they would have fallen all the way to Washington, D.C. So it was imperative to keep that covered up. And there were a number of people that died mysteriously. But getting back to Gary Caradori, he knew that he had to find definitive proof of this pedophile network. And because these kids that had come forward, they were they had been repeatedly molested, given drugs. It's kind of a perfect system because you take these kids, generally from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and then they're molested repeatedly, and then one of the carrots is drugs. So by the time they lose their youthful marketability, they're expunged by the network, and then they go on to commit crimes to support their drug habit, and ultimately they end up in jail and thereby hurt their own credibility. So Gary Caradori had found a number of these kids. Actually, I've got his leads list. He's got 60 victims on the leads list. And my job was to go over. He was an amazing investigator, and I've got all his daily logs. My job was to find these 60 kids because these kids don't generally use, if you're in a network like that and you're expunged, chances are you're not using your social security number very often. But anyway, so Gary Caradori, the FBI had his phones tapped. He was perpetually followed. He would set up meetings with witnesses or victims, and the FBI agents would already be there. He realized that he needed to get some very definitive proof, and he went for blackmail pictures. And he met Rusty Nelson. Now I've got 5 corroborations for this that he met Rusty Nelson. He flew a Cessna to Chicago under the auspices of the All-Star game, the MLB All-Star game, and he was with his son. And there he met Rusty Nelson, and I believe that Rusty Nelson gave him pictures. I've got 5 corroborations on that, as I said. And when he was flying back, his plane blew up over Lee County, Illinois, and he was killed, and his son was killed. And throughout his entire investigation, he had this this leather attaché case or briefcase, and it never left his side. And that's where the pictures would have been. And that attaché case was never found in the debris. So, and if you look at my rendition of what happened there, I'm confident to say that Gary Caradori and his son were murdered. Um, he could not make it back to Nebraska with the blackmail pictures because, as I said, if the dominoes started falling in Omaha, they would have fallen all the way to Washington D.C.
Also of note, you mentioned in the book that after his death, the Franklin Committee, what was like so the Franklin Committee was that like a government body that was set up to investigate this?
It
The
was
Franklin Committee.
a Senate subcommittee.